Hello there everyone, this is UXW Bill. How do you feel about watching another HVAC and refrigeration related video? Well, if you're still watching, that's exactly what you're going to get. Today we're going to take a look at one of these Chinese fire starters. These are also sometimes known as electric dehumidifiers, and a great many of these have been subject to recalls, especially brands that were manufactured by this Gree company. And what we're looking at right now happens to be such an affected model. This was subject to a recall. This was something that someone set out during one of the citywide so-called dump days, where you can throw out all kinds of stuff that you ordinarily wouldn't be able to get rid of. They usually do this once or twice a year, and although people are told not to set out refrigeration equipment that has an intact refrigeration system, doesn't matter, people do it anyway. And usually the metal scrappers are only too happy to come along and pick that stuff up. I do, of course, manage to get a few pieces myself. Some of them we might take a look at in future videos. Some years ago, I found another one of these from a different manufacturer with a different brand name on it that was subject to a recall for the same reason. And I went through it trying to determine where the fire hazard existed, as the Consumer Product Safety Commission here in the United States is never very interested in going into the details as to why those devices have a problem or the exact reason that they're being recalled. What I found in the case of that unit, it had something to do with the overload device on the compressor, which had already begun to look quite burnt. Perhaps it was insufficiently sized for the load it had to carry. Maybe it cycled too much because, again, the specifications were incorrect and it just started to take its toll on the thing. I don't know. And in the spirit of learning other things today, we're also probably going to find out if the distant bass line of the music that the neighbors are playing, which was an Eagles song moments ago, Take It Easy, we'll see if that's enough to get copyright struck. Now, I know this has got an electrical problem of some kind. It's already been submitted to the recall. It's scrap at this point, but I noticed when I plugged this in that the refrigeration system was not building pressure. It had evidently leaked down, and that's something I've been very curious about, because refrigerant loss in these things seems to be an extremely common incidence. And I'm just curious where the leak takes place. So we're going to try to figure that out today. But in order to do that, the first thing we've got to do is take this thing apart. And I'm thinking it'll come apart just like a clamshell. If I take all these screws out on the back panel, there's one down there. We'll see. If not, I'm not afraid to get violent with it. Although this thing's still in pretty good physical condition, and the refrigeration system does run, so there's always a possibility, I suppose, that it could still be carrying a full charge of refrigerant. But if it is, we'll take that off there and get it properly recovered and stored in a way that's safe for the environment. But first, let's get inside the thing and see what we might be dealing with. Here are the insides of the beast. I've got kind of a nice little squirrel cage blower here. Probably take that out and save it for some other task, some other project at some point in the future. And then down here we have the business end of things, the compressor. Says it's from Samsung. It's made in China. You really think Samsung manufactured that, or did they just put their name on it? I'd be willing to bet they just put their name on it. I see oil, some kind of residue around this compressor already. So I'll bet the leak's not too far away. And I'm also concerned about all this breakage around this electrical compartment cover here. This is where the electrical connections, the starting device, if there is one, and the overload are located. And unless somebody was particularly truculent with this thing when they threw it out, I wonder how many people will stop and ask me what that word means. I just can't think of any other reason why that would be broken. Now, these compressors certainly do get hot. This plastic is just crumbling. I just touch it and it falls to pieces. These compressors certainly do run hot, but it looks like this one has been really, really hot. It's even distorted the printing on the label. And I just really have to wonder if this is the reason for the recall right here. Because, yeah, that just looks like it's been hot. Hotter than living hell, hammered Hades, and that's pretty darn hot, in case you happen to be wondering. I'll go ahead and get a little more of this broken off here and just see what I can find. Doesn't look as bad as the one I made a video about that I never published. Probably never will, in case you're asking, but this mastic, that's been hot. I wonder if that's the leak right there, because there's a lot of oil around that tube coming out of the discharge of the compressor. Let's go ahead and peel off some of this foam insulation. We really don't care. Get a bullet piercing valve on that thing and see if it's still under any form of positive pressure. If I've got a bullet piercing valve that'll fit that line, that's a lot smaller than I'm used to working with, and may not have a suitable valve for that. But I'm pretty confident this thing's flat on gas, or very, very close to. Okay, so I've got a couple of the valves to work with, but it seems I've lost the little hoodacky they come with to unscrew them. It's just a hex key is all in the world it is, and I think I've got some of those up in the cab of the truck if I can't find them in here anywhere. Make sure it's not stuck to the magnet on one of those, because my life is a comedy and that's exactly what would happen. I don't know that I want to look around in here, see if I can find them in there, because that'd probably be some kind of a fool's errand or another. As soon as I found one, I'll be right back, thanks to the magic of video editing. Here we go, I got the piercing valve on the suction line. I'll just hope this doesn't leak too badly, because I wouldn't bet this is really the right size for this. Although, who am I kidding? These things leak like crazy. If you leave them on a system, you're not... Oh yeah, I hear a leak. You're not supposed to leave them on a system for exactly that reason. So now we probably got a problem, because I don't think I can stop that. There's not more than a trace of gas in there anyway, so I'm not really worried about it. And before anyone asks, yes, I do very definitely have my EPA 608 Universal card, so I can legally do this kind of thing. Unfortunately, I can't show it to you on video because it perished in my massive money laundering operation, which now no longer runs to just money. It apparently runs to EPA 608 Universal cards as well. I still have my 609 card though. I could show you that. So yeah, that's going to leak. That's going to cause problems. Oh, so much fun. What are we going to do about that? Well, that may end the video before it's even started. I don't know. Alright, let's go ahead and try that again. I've got a second bullet valve here. This one actually fits the hot gas line coming out of the compressor. So we'll go ahead and crank it in and pierce the line here and hope that we're a little luckier this time. You'll notice I've got my low side gauge and hose hooked up. That's because I know there's not more than a little bitty spit of pressure in this system. And I'm hoping that we won't leak this time around. Yep, I see the gauge coming up there. Yeah, there's not more than just the tiniest little spit of refrigerant in this system, which is just fine for our needs. What we'll do with that, that'll be our trace amount of gas for leak testing purposes. We'll go ahead and bring the system up to a more normal pressure with some dry nitrogen gas. I'll also take some more of this plastic off so we might be able to see the coils and figure out just where on the world it happens to be leaking at. Oh, and I should probably go get some soapy bubbles. That would probably help as well. There we go. It's the evaporator and the condenser coil. I get a lot of people who ask me questions about how a dehumidifier operates, and this is a really good demonstration of the principle at hand here. A dehumidifier is nothing more, in most cases, than an air conditioner whose cooling effect has simply been short-circuited. The evaporator sits right here, pulls all the moisture out of the air, as well as the heat, which is then carried away with the refrigerant. The refrigerant then cycles around through the compressor, hits the condenser in a hot gaseous form, and is cooled back down to a liquid as it sheds the heat back into the air that's passing through the dehumidifier. Now, if everything was 100% efficient, the air that came into the dehumidifier would be exactly the same temperature as what came out. But you're also cooling the compressor motor with that refrigerant, and that's usually about a 600 watt power draw. Some of that's being wasted as heat, so you're shedding that into the refrigerant that's going to be cooled off in the condenser coil as well. So these things invariably put out air that's hotter. This fan motor also contributes a certain amount of heat due to the unavoidable inefficiency there as well. As the coils in these things go, these actually look to be in pretty good shape. Most of these, by the time I find them, are very, very rusted out. Of course, there are portions we can't see that are hidden behind this insulation. That's probably That's probably the metering device that's hidden right there. Anyway, it just amazes me though, the way that these things fail left and right, because anybody who's ever owned or seen a vintage dehumidifier can point to machines that are 25, 35, 45, even 50 or more years old, and they're still running on their original refrigerant charge. They've never leaked a drop. So I don't know if it's the metal in these things that's of such poor quality, or if it's the assembly, or if it's just the quality control, whatever there happens to be. But we're going to see if we can figure out where this thing happens to be leaking at. We might start with the obvious approach, which would be just to charge it up with some dry nitrogen over here. Go ahead and turn that feed on. Oh, come on, there we go. Helps to turn it the right way. Then we'll just go ahead and bring this up and see if maybe we can hear something. I hear it flowing in the system. I hear something somewhere. It's leaking around that. That's not good. But I don't hear anything anywhere else. I could just leave it sit with pressure on it and see how long it takes for it to leak down. I think we'll do that. You won't have to wait that long, thanks again to the magic of video editing. But I'll come back in like 15 minutes or so and just see how far down this thing has gone. Of course, now that it's got that in it, that's certainly not helping anything. I could take that off there and braze it shut if I really wanted to, but I don't think I care that much. I'll see if I can get that to stop leaking some other way. I should have known better than to do that. Oh well, nobody's perfect. I probably shouldn't have my soapy bubble water anywhere in remotely the same vicinity as I do my drinking water, because even though there's ice cubes in one of them, it's still very likely in an absent-minded moment I'll pick up the soapy water and at least take a brief drink of it. Alright, check this out. I think there might actually be a leak in the casing of the compressor itself, which is just amazing to me. One's got to watch very, very carefully. But the past couple of times I've done this, I've seen some bubble activity from around that copper stem. I'm not seeing it now, though. Yeah, I don't know. Moments ago I thought it was bubbling. I don't think those little tiny bubbles down there mean much of anything. Well, we'll put a little more water on there and just see what happens. See that? See that little tiny bubble right there? I think it might be leaking right at the body of the compressor, which would certainly explain the presence of oil, but given that it managed to blow the whole charge, I really would have expected to see a great deal more oil around. Well, we'll poke around with the leak detector here in a little bit. We're still doing our timed leak down test, and it's been a couple minutes and nothing's happened yet. It's still rock solid at about 100 psi. So the leak must be very, very slow wherever it is. You may never find it if it's slow enough. Okay, thank you. That's good. Alright, it's been 15 minutes, and this thing may have slipped a little, but it hasn't lost much pressure. So now what we're going to turn to, given that I played around a little bit with the soapy bubbles and didn't turn up very much, we'll bring out the electronic leak detector. This is an Inficon TechMate G1. I don't remember what the big reason for my ultimately selecting this particular model was, but there was something. Might have had to do with the fact that it was made in the United States, and also that I own one of their refrigerant recovery machines and have been very, very happy with that. They're the same ones that we had in class, and they worked pretty well. I'm not so sure this was the model of leak detector to buy, though. I've never had much luck with this thing. It seems like it's almost too sensitive for its own good, and if you step it down to the low sensitivity level, it's almost like, well, maybe it's not quite sensitive enough. But we'll go ahead and give it a try. We'll start out over here, and yes, it makes a god-awful electronic scream. It's very, very loud for a couple of minutes while the sensor warms up and gets ready to work. I'm not going to make you sit through the nearly 2 minutes that happens to take. It's been nearly 2 years since I used this thing. I'm a little surprised the batteries are even still good in it. Of course, I haven't looked in on them. They've probably started leaking. I think I should put some tape or a drop of glue over that buzzer, something to quiet it down a little bit, but then I don't know if I ever use this thing in a noisy machine room, if I'd ever hear it. Oh wait, I said I wasn't going to subject you to this, so oops. Okay, there we go. Now it's ready to operate. So we'll head back over here. Got it on high sensitivity right now. And we'll see how we fare with this. But I think the first thing we'll do is just go ahead and crank up the pressure a little bit. More than a little bit. We'll really give this thing the beans. More than that. It's a Refrigerant 410A system. It ought to be able to handle that, no sweat. Alright, let's see what we find here, if we find anything. Okay, nothing on that side of the coil. Let's try this side of the condenser. I suspect that it's probably the evaporator that usually fails in these because it's the one that's moist. Oh, did we get something there? What was that? I don't know, it's kind of hitting there. That's another thing this thing will do, and I don't know that any other brand would be any better. Occasionally it'll just take off for a second or two like it's really picked something up, and then it fades away and you go back into that general area and you can't find it again. And I know it takes patience to use one of these. Oh, what do we got there? Oh. I'm using the tiny spit of refrigerant that was left in this thing as my trace amount of gas for leak detection purposes. I'm a little surprised it's not going off near that thing. We'll test out that bug here. We'll make sure it's not leaking any refrigerant. You really got to watch those bugs, you know. Well, if the body of the compressor's leaking around that stub, it's not picking it up. I cranked the bejesus out of that thing to get it to stop leaking, and I think I succeeded. Certainly not setting off the detector. Well, we'll try the other side of the coil. Alright, let's see what we get over here. Ooh, there was something. But again, I don't know if that was just fleeting or... Let's try the condenser now. Manufacturing date codes in this thing suggest that it was made in 2015. I don't know how much time it would have spent in the retail channel, but that strongly suggests that whoever bought it barely got 5 years worth of service out of it, which is just absolutely terrible. And you'd think I'd pay a little more attention to where I was pointing the camera. Certainly setting off all the neighborhood dogs. Yeah, I'm not finding it. We'll stick it in there. Alright, we'll try the face of the evaporator and see if we get anywhere with that. Alright, let's see if we get anywhere with this. I'm not going to waste a whole lot more time on this. This is just one of these things to do for fun. Really a strange idea of fun to most people. Especially for anyone who finds this as their regular occupation. Another thing I've noticed about these Chinese dehumidifiers, they probably all rip the design off one another. It's hard to say who initially came up with it. But I've noticed that they stick their humidity sensor right here on the front of the evaporator. I know they had to put it somewhere, but what I've noticed is that all of these things universally have terrible hysteresis. As soon as they cycle off because the humidistat or the microcontroller that's sensing it is satisfied, they run the fan for a little bit, and then they shut it off, and the air gets stagnant and moist again, and as soon as they've shut off, they cycle right back on. And I have to think, you know, how did this ever pass the Energy Star stuff? I've never read any of the Energy Star legislation, but it just seems to me, at risk of getting very political here, like it's just a complete and utter sham. These things don't last, and they can't be very efficient with all of that cycling going on. And they certainly don't seem to use materially less electricity than the older ones do. So I don't know. I mean, maybe there's some angle I haven't thought of, but darned if I know what it is. Yeah, I don't know that we're ever going to find this. And I'm not going to uncase that metering device and see if it's there. This thing could just have a slow enough leak in it that you'd never find it. I would think that whatever trace amount of refrigerant was in here would be enough to set this thing off. I, of course, haven't taken all the insulation off of this suction line, and I'm not going to because, frankly, I don't care that much. Yeah, I don't think I'm going to find it. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this little video nevertheless, as we tried to figure out just where exactly these things happen to fail. Even if we weren't ultimately successful, I'm certainly still interested in hearing your constructive commentary, as always.